Hey guys, it's Jazz. Obviously, this is a video that no thru-hiker ever wants to make, but since I've gone through the experience, I figured sharing it with you guys would maybe inspire somebody to be a little bit more prepared if they were to have a medical emergency on trail. So, for me personally, I was dealing with an illness for about 5 years before coming on trail. And during that time, I lost a lot of muscle mass. I was very malnourished and just weak in general. And I honestly never even thought that I would be able to hike the trail due to my physical condition that I had been in for so long. And I thought for sure if I was to have any sort of medical emergency on trail, it would be because of that illness that I was dealing with or because of just past things that have happened. But that was not the case. 3 years before coming on trail, I had spent that time trying to recuperate and just train really hard to gain back all my muscle mass and be ready for a through hike. So if you guys have seen our previous vlogs about our through hike, you'll know that I was getting sick quite a bit on trail, just from overexertion, just doing too many miles starting out. But I would not say that any of those dizzy spells or whatever it may have been constituted as a medical emergency. It was just me doing too much when I didn't have that many miles under my belt. So this whole thing started in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We were also told that the Smokies was the one place on trail you did not want to get sick. Now, I don't know how true that actually is. I don't know why we were told that. If you wanted rescue, it was very limited in the Smokies, but I'm assuming it was because of no service and also maybe the tree coverage. Helicopters really might have difficulty getting into some of those spots. So after we crossed the bridge at Fontana, we made our way up the incline into the Smokies, and I started to feel a weird pain in my lower abdomen. And I kind of just ignored it, like I thought maybe it was from me being dehydrated or whatever else. So I just kept on walking. That pain lasted for about 3 more days on and off, and again, I just decided to ignore it and keep hiking. And on that third day of hiking, we stopped at Mount Collins Shelter and went to sleep for the night. The next morning at around 3 a.m., I woke up in severe pain. And this time it was not in my lower abdomen, it was in my lower back. I tried many times to go back to sleep, but I just couldn't. The pain kept getting worse and worse. And it was like a pain that I have never felt before. It was like stabbing and aching, and it just like took over my whole body. It was definitely the worst pain I had ever felt in my life. So it began to be so unbearable that I just needed to throw up. So I unzip the tent and try to make my way outside so I can throw up. And of course, it's 3 a.m., so it's pitch black outside, and it's raining. So where we had set up our tent was now full of mud, of course, and I couldn't really bear to stand up. And so I had to crawl out of the tent, and I didn't want to get mud all over myself and all over my pajamas. So I put my shoes on my hands and I put Abigail's shoes on my knees, and I just began to crawl out of the tent and throw up. At this point, I was a little worried about bears. We had just had a bear issue the night before this, so I was worried that they might be out and about near our campsite looking for food. So I grabbed my flashlight and I just started shining it around everywhere, trying to make a little bit of noise so if there were any bears, they would leave. At this point, Abigail hears me throwing up. She wakes up, she's very concerned, and I assure her that I am only throwing up from pain and I am not throwing up because I have noro. So when I'm done throwing up, I crawl back into the tent and I pull out the first aid kit to try to find some medicine. And we had aspirin and non-aspirin, and I remember getting really frustrated over what the difference between those two were and if non-aspirin was even a real thing or not. but I eventually just decided to take whichever one said had acetaminophen in it. I remember just trying to get comfortable in the tent, which involved crawling over Abigail a million times, and she didn't even wake up. She went right back to sleep. She didn't care that I was crawling all over her. We had had such a long day the day previous. So she just kept telling me, do what you need to do. I'm gonna go to sleep. And if you didn't know, we were sharing a one-person tent for the entirety of the trail. So it was kind of hard not to be all over each other in the first place. But when I was trying to get comfortable in that moment, I was kind of getting all up in her personal space. And the medicine that I took didn't last long because I immediately had to go back outside the tent to throw up again. This time, the pain was getting way worse, so I was kind of like moaning and groaning a bit, and I accidentally woke up a hiker that was in their tent about 50 feet from us. That hiker then decided to come over and see if I was okay. Immediately, she asked me if it was norovirus, and I was like, no, I assure you it's not norovirus, it's just because I'm in so much pain. I really didn't want anybody to think that I had noro. Nobody wanted to have noro. No one would have helped me if they thought that I had that. Luckily, that's the only person that was woken up because we decided to put our tent very far away from the shelter because we were wanting to watch a movie that night and we didn't want to disturb anybody by being loud. That hiker then tries to help me walk to the road that's nearby so that Cam can pick me up and I can go to the doctor or rest or do whatever needed to be done. I wasn't sure at that point what I had, so I didn't know if I needed to go to the doctor or not. But when I realized that I couldn't really walk and the pain was getting way worse in my lower back, I thought it could have been appendicitis. And for that, I definitely would need to go to the hospital. Mount Collins Shelter is on a side trail off the Appalachian Trail that I would say is probably zero point 0.5 miles. And once you get back on trail, I think it's about 0.2 miles from the road. It is right after Klingman's Dome, so there is a road that parallels the trail for a little bit afterwards. I was so happy that I only had to walk like 0.7 miles to get back to the van. But when I started walking, it was a completely different story. I just could not walk at all. I was walking a few feet and then sitting down to rest, and then as soon as I thought I could do it again, I would walk a few more feet and then I would collapse. So I couldn't really do anything but lay there in the mud and the rain and the dark. After a while had passed, the other hikers from the shelter started waking up and making their way back down trail. I was basically collapsed in the middle of the trail, so everybody had to step over me to get by. One of the hikers who had seen me on the ground decided to press the SOS button on his Garmin device. We were very lucky that someone there had a Garmin that they could alert emergency services with for us, and we are very grateful for that hiker. Everyone kept assuring me that emergency services was on the way and that they would be there soon to hike me out. I think I was given an estimation of about 20 minutes, but 20 minutes went by, and then 30 minutes went by, and then an hour went by, and then 2 hours, and all I could do was just sit there in pain, and Abigail just had to sit there and watch me. I remember asking her many, many times to just grab a rock and knock me out if she could, because the pain was so bad and I thought it would be so much better to just be knocked out. She obviously did not go that route, but she did stick with me, and it was really cold when we were up there, so she ended up putting my sleeping bag around me to keep me somewhat warm at least. It's hard to be warm when everything's wet, but still. Eventually, after 4 hours of waiting, they showed up. And they were great. They administered pain relief medication through an IV immediately. And I remember things getting very foggy after they were able to sedate me a little bit. And I was just so excited to finally be taken off that mountain. But unfortunately, the stretcher that they were going to take me down the mountain with was being brought by a different group of EMTs who were late. So while we were waiting on that stretcher to show up, the EMTs were just asking me a bunch of questions, trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and they finally came to the realization that it was not appendicitis because I was pointing to the wrong spot. So I was super, super thankful that it wasn't appendicitis, and I felt like maybe I didn't need to go to the hospital anymore, but they ultimately convinced me that it was the best thing to do because it could still be something else, and either way, they wanted to have me not feeling that amount of pain anymore. So the stretcher finally showed up after about 40 minutes, and they put me on there and took turns kind of, hiking me out. And when we finally got to the road, Cam was there waiting for me. The ambulance was there waiting for me. They put me in. I just hear Cam ask if I'm okay. And I hear him say that he's going to follow me to the hospital. So Abigail hops in the ambulance, Cam gets back in the van, and we all try to make our way to the hospital. I remember them telling me that it was okay if I felt like I wanted to go to sleep in the ambulance, and so I did. Whatever sedatives they gave me worked really well, and I was able to rest for a little bit. Once we actually got to the hospital, they immediately put me into an MRI and collected all the samples that they needed to collect. The doctor came back into my room when the results came back in, and he finally got to the bottom of what the problem was and what was causing all of this pain for me. And it was something that I never thought I would ever have to deal with. It was a kidney stone. And if you've ever had a kidney stone, you know the pain is really, really bad. I was at least relieved, though, that it was a solvable issue and that everything was going to be fine. So the doctor leaves, and I decide to try to take a little nap while I can until Cam gets to the hospital, because at that point he still hadn't shown up. And after I've rested a little bit, I start to wake up, and I see Abigail at the foot of my hospital bed on the phone. And she's just talking to her family about everything that happened, that I had been in the hospital and that I had gotten a kidney stone. And then I hear her family on the phone ask, well, how's Cam? And at that moment, Abigail had made eye contact with me and knew that I was awake and was kind of hesitant to say what she had to say next, which was that the van had wrecked. I just remember hearing that and thinking, oh my gosh, is Cam okay? Or what is the state of the van? Am I fully homeless now? It was just a lot of things going through my mind. So apparently, as Cam was pulling out of the parking lot to go follow the ambulance to the hospital, it was just very slippery, and he was very nervous, scared for me, and the van ended up slipping and falling into a ditch. I'm so glad that a ditch was there at all, because on other points of that same road, we could have easily just fallen straight off the mountain, which would have been extremely scary. Luckily, we had AAA, but unluckily, they did not come out that far. So he had to find a tow truck a different way. The way that the van was positioned, they couldn't tow it out regularly, so they had to tow it out from the side, or else it could have tipped. And while they were pulling it out sideways, part of the suspension broke and popped one of our tires. So now Cam also had to find a body shop somewhere to repair his van before he could make his way to the hospital. Luckily, he was able to find one repair shop in the area, but unfortunately, all of their bays were full of cars that they were currently working on. But after hearing about our situation, they were willing to try anything they could to help us out. So they had Cam pull up the van to the side of one of the bays and they just started working on it there. The van ended up needing a part replaced because of what was damaged when they were trying to pull it out. And that mechanic shop unfortunately didn't have that part in stock. So they went as far as to send another employee to another shop to grab the part and bring it back for us. They repaired everything really, really quickly, and finally Cam was able to make his way to the hospital to come and see me. Ultimately, the kidney stone ended up being small enough to where I didn't need to stay there for any reason. I could just pass it on my own. So they were able to release me that day.
It's probably gonna be about as much as
If I could do the whole trail every mile in this wheelchair, I'd be set.
Ultralight wheelchair.
I ended up just staying in the van and resting for a few days while I kind of recovered from that and made sure to drink a lot of water and lemon juice and things like that. I did end up feeling better after a while, and so I was able to get back on trail. But at this point, a lot of our funds had been put into repairing the van and the medical bill, so we didn't really know if we were going to be able to finish the trail or not. I unfortunately was not in a position to be able to get insurance before the trail, so all of my bills were without insurance included. If you are able to get insurance for your through hike, I definitely 100% would recommend that because you never really know what can go wrong. After thinking it over, we basically just decided to keep going on the trail for as long as we possibly could. Like, once we were down to our last dollar, we would leave. And I'm so glad that we did ultimately decide to keep pushing forward and keep enjoying our experience on the trail. I am still paying off that medical bill to this day, but that's okay. I'm sure it will be gone and away from my mind one day. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I will be happy to answer them. And let me know if you guys have ever had an experience where you needed to be evacuated off trail. I'm very curious about that. And thank you for watching. If you want to see the rest of our journey, be sure to subscribe and follow along our vlogs.